Hey sports fans, Coach Nick here, and welcome to B-Ball Breakdown, our NBA preview for the 2013 draft. Joining me is James Kerti, a guy who's based in Las Vegas and doing some really good consulting for NBA teams on draft prospects. James, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Nick. Thanks for having me on. Big fan of this channel.
Hey, my pleasure. Glad to have you here to offer a lot of your great insight into these prospects that are coming into the NBA. And let's jump right into it, shall we? We have 12 prospects we're going to identify, and we're going to start off in this program with just the first 6 we're going to look at and how they might fit into the NBA. So let's jump right into it and look at Nerlens Noel, who's coming out off of a ACL injury out of Kentucky. And give me your thoughts to start.
Well, Nick, obviously he's a guy who came into college at Kentucky as one of the best prospects in the nation. And, despite that knee injury that he suffered back in February, I feel like he didn't really disappoint anybody with the way that he played. He averaged, I believe it was about 4.5 blocks, bunch of steals, really just an absolute menace on the defensive end and on the boards. He still has a lot of room to grow on offense. I'm excited to see how he keeps developing in that regard. But with the physical tools that he has right now, I could easily see him being among the NBA's elite pick-and-roll big men within a couple of years.
I think so, too. The name that kind of sticks in my mind when I watch him play, and don't call me crazy, is David Robinson. And I think primarily because of the way he moves. At 7 feet plus the huge wingspan, he moves like a guard to me. So some of the other guys he's getting compared to, I think he's a better athlete. I think he's a better athlete than Anthony Davis. Now, I finally got to a chance to really study his jump shot, and that is pretty frightening. But I've seen him put the ball on the ground. I've seen him finish well with both hands at the rim. And I think that, I think he has an unlimited ceiling.
Yeah, I think he's definitely got a lot of upside, and I like some of the, skills that you talked about. One of the things that I'd like to see him keep improving on is simply just getting stronger. You look at him right now, I believe he's listed at like 206 pounds right now. And I remember last year when another Kentucky big man, Anthony Davis, was coming to the draft, and people said that he was too skinny. And he, if you look at the numbers, he was like 15 or 20 pounds heavier than Nerlens is right now. So obviously he's got some work to do in terms of bulking up.
I would have thought the same thing as far as dooming him for any success in the NBA because of that weight. But after I saw what Kevin Durant has been able to do with a guy who couldn't even do like 10 push-ups at draft day, I'm sold that is the key to success right now. But we'll have to see. I've talked to a couple of my guys, and here he has a very good work ethic and will rehab and will work on the weight gain and strength improvement as well as anybody out there. So we have high hopes to see him do very well.
Definitely.
Well, let's move on to our next pick, which would be Victor Oladipo out of Indiana, a guy who's a high flyer for a team that did pretty well in the tournament. What are your thoughts?
Well, Nick, he definitely was a key part of an Indiana team that had a great season. They were consistently ranked among the top teams in the country. The thing that impresses me the most about him is his toughness out there, the NBA-ready body and athleticism that he has. And he showed a lot of skill out there, especially on the defensive end. He's one of those guys who's constantly forcing turnovers and disrupting NBA offenses. So I could see him coming in and making an instant impact in that regard for sure.
I'm a little bit cold on him for some reason. I don't think he's the most skilled guy, and he's a lot shorter than I thought. For some reason, in my mind, watching him, and the impression was, I thought he was closer to like 6'7". He could play a serious forward, but if he's really only 6'4" and has to play shooting guard, I'm a little bit, I think maybe the ceiling is somewhere in that Aaron Aflalo range. Good athlete, maybe can continue to improve on a lot of other things, but from right now, what I see out of him, for the most part, is what you said, supreme athleticism and really aggressive nature, but I'm not so sure how he's going to do when the game slows down in the half court.
I hear you. Well, I'm not as worried about his height so much, because if you look at his wingspan, it's pretty good, and you don't defend with your face after all. So I think he'll be pretty okay when it comes to the defensive end. I'm just interested in seeing how he keeps developing as an offensive player. He shot the 3-ball pretty well last year, but if you look at the numbers, he only had about 2 attempts a game. So for me, kind of the question is, was he only really shooting when he was wide open? And if so, how's that going to translate to, maybe being a floor spacer in the NBA? I think he's got some skill there, but still has a lot of work to do. And some of these other guys, you look at guys like McCollum or Caldwell Pope, those guys were shooting 5 or 6 threes a game. That's a big difference to me.
Move on to our next prospect, Michael Carter-Williams out of Syracuse, who played for a coach that I'm not that fond of, primarily because he plays strictly 2-3 zone the entire season in his entire career of 30-plus years of coaching. So it's very difficult to find out whether or not these guys can actually play man-to-man defense. What's your take, James, on Michael Carter-Williams?
Well, Nick, I share your skepticism of his defense. You know, he averaged, I think, like almost 3 steals a game last year, which on the surface, that's really impressive. But, you know, then again, you kind of put that in context, and he's a long point guard playing in a trapping zone defense with the Orange. So I don't really know exactly how that's going to translate to the NBA. Certainly a guy who has some great court vision, but I'd still like to see him develop more as an offensive player. He only shot about 29% from deep last year, and I believe less than 40% from the field. So there's definitely some questions about exactly how he can contribute as an actual scorer.
You know, it's funny. He reminds me a little bit of Jason Kidd because at the beginning of his career, he couldn't shoot from, you know, outside of about 10 feet from the basket. So he's got a real problem, I think, with shooting. I think he's got a real problem with athletic ability. He's not that explosive. So the one thing he does have going for him is, being 6'6". And if Phil Jackson were still in the league, he'd have a great spot there because he always loved big guards. So we'll have to find out. I don't know how well it's going to translate right now because, yeah, I'm very skeptical of him being able to play man-to-man defense. And if they throw him out there, he's got good feet, but he's just not that – I don't think he's that quick to guard point guards. I'm not so sure that's going to work so well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, guarding point guards in today's NBA is one of the toughest things to do, and I think he's certainly behind the curve a little bit because he didn't really get that kind of man-to-man experience trying to guard guys in college.
We haven't seen any post-up game either because he's certainly going to have to – he would have an advantage there. So because remember, if he's going to get torched on defense, he better be able to hit some threes or post up or do something on the other end to mitigate that. So right now, I don't know. I think he might be sort of stuck in between until he develops more of his body and gets a little quicker and more explosive.
Yeah, I could definitely see that happening. I think it's going to kind of depend on what team he ends up with. You know, if he's somewhere where there's a lot of pressure on him right away to be a scorer and to kind of run the pick and roll and score out of that, I think he's going to be in trouble. But, you know, maybe if he ends up with a spot where they have other guys who can kind of create their own shots and make some plays, that'll take some of the pressure off him early on.
Well, we'll have to see how that plays out. And let's move on to our next player, which is Otto Porter out of Georgetown, who played in the Princeton offense, so a guy after my own heart. How do you see him fitting into the NBA right away?
Well, Nick, I'm very high on Otto Porter. In fact, if I were picking for the Cleveland Cavaliers, he'd probably be the guy that I target for the #1 overall. You know, on one hand, he's not in the same vein as some of these other players in terms of being able to create his own shot, but I think he's a really fantastic complementary player, a guy who can shoot from deep, is a tremendous passer, maybe the best wing defender in the draft. He's a terrific defender, high basketball IQ, playing for a great coach with Georgetown and John Thompson III. So I think he's got a lot of upside as an NBA guy, and he's also very NBA ready in terms of how prepared he is.
I agree. I mean, I'm not so sure that he's going to get up to as high as #1, but certainly he looks, to me, a lot like a young Rudy Gay. And I was extremely high on Rudy Gay coming out of college in those first few years because he kind of embodied everything you said. He was, I thought, a tough defender. He could shoot well, and he was tough off the dribble. He had the complete package to play in a team framework. And so I anticipate Otto Porter being able to jump in and help right away with any team he goes to.
I agree, and you know, like I said, I don't expect the Cavs to take him, but I think if they did, he'd fit in really well with what they're trying to accomplish with their young guys. And his three-point shooting and defense right away is going to make him a big-time asset, even if he never does really develop as an off-the-dribble kind of guy.
What do you think? Can he go small ball and play the power forward?
I think it's possible. You know, I'd like to see him bulk up a little bit more to do that. I think he's listed somewhere around like 200, 210 pounds right now, so he's not like a super big dude. But I think with the right team, he could probably give you some minutes there. But ultimately, I think he's better out there on the wing.
Absolutely. Well, we'll have to see how that goes. And let's move on to C.J. McCollum, who is coming out of Lehigh, led a big upset against Duke in the tournament the year before and then suffered an injury. So tell me what your thoughts about him.
Well, Nick, he's definitely somebody who's really impressed me. I know a lot of the talk about C.J. McCollum is like, you know, can he play the point? Is he a point guard? And, you know, to me, I kind of don't even really care about that too much. You know, I think he's got the kind of lead guard skills that you look for to be a shot creator both for himself and for his teammates. You know, ultimately, I think he'd be best if he ended up with a team like, say, Minnesota or Portland, who was another small school guy in Damian Lillard, or you could play with Rubio. I think playing with some of those guys could take a little bit of the pressure off him to be his team's, whole source of offense and a shot creator for everybody.
I agree. It's funny. I don't know if Portland's a great fit for him because they already have Damian Lillard, who, in my mind, he is a clone to some degree. I think he's got a terrific outside shot, can really put the ball on the floor, and he's very he's played college for 4 years, so he's a very seasoned veteran coming in right away. So I have no doubt he can come in and run a team. So I'm not so sure I want him to go to Portland, but certainly he definitely deserves a shot at a place that's stable, that has a good system, because he played pick and roll, and he shoot.
Yes, he can.
So I definitely think that this is Damian Lillard, 2.0.
Yeah, well, if you saw his three-point shooting numbers in college, I think he shot like 51% as a senior. I mean, that is absolutely crazy.
And it was on high volume, over 5.
Yeah, he was shooting a lot. It's not like he was just taking 2 threes a game and making one of them. He was hitting he had games where he was making like 5 or 6 threes. Really impressive stuff.
And as Damian Lillard showed us, it doesn't really matter if you're not playing against that elite competition, because, quite frankly, with all the one-and-dones now anyway, college basketball is sort of this weird way station where even the elite teams don't always have the highest competition to play against either. So I'm not going to hold that against him either. I think he's going to have a good career.
Yeah, I mean, either really coming out the year after Lillard, I think that's got to be a great thing for him. It's fresh in people's minds how good a small school guard like that can be in the NBA.
Well, let's move on to another player on the West Coast named Alan Crabb. Played for Cal in the Pac-12 in a weak year for the Pac-12, but did pretty well. What do you think his chances are to make it in the NBA?
Well, Nick, I think he can be a really good player in the NBA. We're talking a couple days, couple weeks after the NBA Finals, and looking at what guys like Danny Green and Kawhi Leonard did. And I think Crabbe has the potential to be that same kind of guy who contributes three-pointers and plays really good defense, both one-on-one and within a team framework. He's definitely got that skill set. And, while he's not a guy who's going to do a whole bunch of work scoring off the dribble, he currently has the skills right now to put the ball on the floor for 1 or 2 dribbles and create a little bit of space for his shot, which you can't say about, all the shooters out there.
Yeah, he definitely seemed like he played within himself, didn't try and do too much. I'm not so sure how that translates to the NBA. Cal really hasn't had a terrific player for a long time, as far as I can remember. And so I'm not so sure he has exactly what he needs physically and aggressively enough to really make an impact. So I think he's a bubble guy who could make a roster, but I'm not so sure he'd have an impact, at least this first year.
Yeah, we'll see. I think it depends on where he ends up. He's not a guy that I think is ever really going to be like the #1 guy on the team. But in the same way as Danny Green was for the Spurs throughout the season and during the playoffs, you don't need everybody to be that #1 guy. And just having a guy who can give you some three-point shooting and good defense from the wing, that can really change the nature of a playoff series.
So you think that he has enough defensive ability to make an impact?
I think so. He's not one of those super athletic guys, but he's really scrappy defensively. And with the way NBA defenses are evolving right now to being more of a kind of like a team defense than just each guy guarding his own man, I think at Cal he showed me he's got a pretty good understanding of how that works.
Okay, well, we'll have to see how that plays out. And let's move on to our final pick of this part 1, and that is Grant Jarrett coming out of Arizona, a player who I had a chance to watch a little bit in high school. And, I have to tell you, I was surprised that we wanted to even include him on here, because I just don't see him being a legitimate, real NBA prospect. So tell me why you think he's going to actually make a team and have an impact.
Well, Nick, he's one of the guys who's kind of been climbing up some people's draft boards ever since he declared. I remember the initial chatter around him, up to a couple months ago was that he was maybe a marginal second-round guy, but it sounds like he's impressing some teams in workouts maybe. And I think he's got some upside as a stretch 4 type. He's a big guy. He can shoot the 3. And he's got a high basketball IQ. He can pass a little bit and is very active away from the ball, setting screens for guys. And, there are a lot of teams, again, the Spurs, for example, who do run those kinds of structured NBA offenses, who really value having a young big guy who can contribute in that kind of way.
Well, let's not forget, as far as the NBA goes, there are very few teams that have a structure like the Spurs that can plug a guy like that into.
Sure.
So this is definitely what he has written all over him is like situational. It depends on where he goes. And I got to tell you, there are very few places where I think he could really go and be able to even contribute that way. I don't think he's a very good athlete. Honestly, I feel like he's slow and a little bit unsmooth. You know, he does shoot well, but that's about all he can do. He's not going to put the ball on the floor. I don't think he posted up much at all. He certainly doesn't have the body to post up, you know, big players in the NBA. So, you know, I liken him to, you know, Brian Cook, who was a guy who kind of, you know, made a living as a bigger guy who wasn't very athletic, who could shoot the three. And to Brian Cook's credit, he actually played 9 seasons in the NBA.
Yeah, and, you know, again, if you want to go the Brian Cook route, I hear you, but, you know, I think a lot of teams would be fairly happy if they got a Brian Cook late in the first round or in the early second, considering, you know, some of these guys we see go in that range these days who really end up not sticking in the league at all.
Okay, fair enough. We'll see. You know, I think I will be surprised if he gets picked that high. If he gets picked in the first 20 picks, I'd be very surprised.
Yeah, I don't see that happening either. But, you know, he's kind of one of those borderline first-round guys is some of the chatter that I've been hearing.
Okay, well, we'll still see. And then, you know, and if he makes it and really, you know, even gets to play a little bit, again, even more surprised because, you know, the NBA is a different animal, and we'll have to see how he can shake that out. So, well, James, thanks for joining us. We have part 2 coming up tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. And we'll have even more draft picks to go over and some other big names.